Okay, let's get into it. I wish I had some tea right now because my throat's kind of sore. Let's see if I can talk for 40 minutes. We'll find out. Hey guys, my name is Matt Workman and welcome to Cinematography Database Show. And in this episode, we're going to be breaking down the cinematography of The Revenant, shot by DP Emmanuel Chivo Lubezki. Not that Chivo needs any introduction. He's the guy that won the Oscar for Best Cinematography the last 2 years and is up for it again for this movie. The film was directed by Alejandro Iñárritu, and I'm on IMDb looking at that right now just to make sure that that's actually true. And Emmanuel Lubezki is signed to WPA, or World Production Agency. And you can go to his website, or this website at least, and check out some of the commercials. He's actually done commercials with Alejandro, not surprisingly. And his feature reel, it's okay. It's like, what we got going on? We got The Revenant, Birdman, I guess that won the Oscar, Gravity, pretty good, Tree of Life, Children of Men. You're never going to have a reel like this. So that's Emmanuel Lubezki, and check out his work at WPA, and check out WPA. Killer agency. Have a couple great friends on WPA. And I just wanted to say that a lot of the behind-the-scenes footage and some of the insights that I got to kind of research what went into making this movie is from a documentary that's on 20th Century Fox's YouTube page called A World Unseen. And it's a 44-minute documentary about the making of The Revenant and the kind of moving political story and history about the movie, which I wasn't that aware of. I mostly look like, what lenses did they shoot with, and what did they, but there's a really great story behind it, and I think that speaks a lot to the motivation of the director Alejandro and Chivo, why they would go through such pain, honestly, to film this movie. Is I think the story is really amazing. So definitely, if you haven't seen it yet, go check out The Revenant. If it's in theaters, I'm not sure when it comes out, go buy it legit on iTunes or wherever you buy movies these days. And definitely hop on YouTube, head to 20th Century Fox's YouTube page and watch this amazing documentary. All 44 minutes of it, really quite moving and informative and inspiring, I think, to see filmmakers who, Alejandro and Chivo won an Oscar already, and they could be on to making just like profitable movies and making money, but they decided to do this with their power and their position in the industry. They chose to tell a story that hasn't been told this way before, and there's some really interesting things going on there. So again, I'm not going to show footage from the movie or anything like that because it gets flagged instantly. So I still don't have an intro, but I'm gonna flash to the logo, and then we're gonna get right back to this. Okay, as soon as Cine Design is done, I swear I'm gonna make an awesome intro, or at least an intro. So let's get into the Photoshop. Here we are, the cinematography of The Revenant. DP Emmanuel Lubezki. I know we said that already. We're gonna get into it. And now the first question that I think is on everyone's mind, and there's been a lot of buzz about this on the forums, on Reddit, on No Film School, everyone's writing about it, and there's this question out there, it's the elephant in the room: did they shoot The Revenant on the iPhone? And the answer is yes. Here is Chivo framing up a nice shot, and you'll see that they shot full aperture on the iPhone, but then they did a 2:4:0 crop and post. So yeah, it was the iPhone, and it's not even like the 6 Plus, it was the 5. And here we see the green carabiner. Of course, you can't film a movie as big as The Revenant without a carabiner in your hand. So here is one more shot, proof. Then here's the B camera over here that they did shoot The Revenant on the iPhone. So you heard it first here. iPhone, that's what they used. So I want to get the BTS stuff out of the way kind of quick because I just want to talk about the imagery, and I'm going to try not to do any spoilers about the movie and that sort of thing, but there's a couple looks and some cool things that I just that I took away personally, and that's what I wanted to share with you. Like, this is not necessarily supposed to be like a news reporting type of show where I'm breaking down like this is what happened beat to beat by beat. It's just like, it's kind of my interpretation of the cinematography from seeing the behind the scenes video and then seeing the footage. It's kind of like how I see it, what I see visually happening. You know, I didn't get to actually I've never interviewed Chivo before. I hope to in the future for the podcast and for other things like this, but this is really my interpretation of this movie and what I've seen from it. So this movie was filmed over the course of 5 years, I believe, which is kind of incredible. And so what you have here is, this is the Alexa M, and they literally took like a regular Alexa that would look like this, and they went like this and they chopped it in half. That was the story. I've heard this story from a couple people from Airy and people who have used the Alexa M. It's people wanted to use the Alexa for its Alev sensor, the way that it handles colors. Everyone loves log C. They've done a great job engineering and capturing and squeezing all the dynamic range into a usable container. And people really like it, but they needed it to be smaller. And so this is a similar setup to what they were using for Birdman. And it's literally like an Alexa cut in half. And the other half of the Alexa is back here on his assistant's back. So he walks around, kind of spots him because there's a lot of like pretty intense operating. So he's always got his hand on him to make sure he's not going to fall over or like run into something crazy. And at the same time, he's holding the actual recorder. So it's kind of sketchy. You hope that the connection here and whatever is connecting back there, that is a strong connection. You don't want that to die. And then we've got there's a Bolt wireless up here somewhere sending off signals into space. And then we have Alejandro with his director's monitor receiving those signals. I guess it's not really going from space. It's kind of going directly to it. And then here's our wireless follow focus, the Preston. And yeah, so this is by and large how a lot of this was photographed, and this is how close he was to him in a lot of these scenes, and we'll talk about the wide lenses. So no iPhone, that was a joke. I don't know if I sold that joke very well. Here's a cool shot. Oh, and it's got the map. It's got the rails from the side. Now, when you see these lightweight rails from the side, that's usually a Panavision thing. Panavision puts the rails on the side, but I'm not sure what's going on in this case. But there's some interesting stuff here to take away from the tech side if you guys are interested in that. We've got a Zeiss/Arri Master Prime, which is a T1.3 nice sharp lens. And what they wanted in this, honestly, is, I would assume, is the anti-flare coat. So a lot of people are going against anti-flare coats. They want that veiling and want that flaring. Not so much for this movie. You'll see a lot of lens flares. They hold the flare perfectly. It's literally like a dot. It's one dot. That's the whole flare. So they do a good job of killing flares and getting rid of flares. Interesting stuff here is the Cinetape for this thing shoots out a signal. Say it hits this guy's pack and it goes back, and that's called time of flight. And that time, the time it took for that signal to come back, it can calculate the distance. So it'll be like it's 1 foot away because it took that long. It knows the speed of sound. That's how that works. Something cute happening here is that there's no map box, because the map box would normally clip onto this ring here. It looks like they've kind of Velcroed a little flap here. And then I think the lens is cold, so they're using a hairdryer to warm it up. Something like that. Yeah. And so getting through to more gear stuff, here's the 12mm Master Prime. It's upside down for whatever reason. Maybe that's how they get it even lower to the ground, I'd assume. And again, just look how close they are to him. Really, really close. You can almost figure out what the focus distance was here. And then look at all the crap on this matte box to keep this camera from getting wet. Binder clips. Keep binder clips in your AC kit. It's that pro tip there. I promise we're going to stop looking at behind the scenes photos, though. I like these a lot. Again, really close. I thought this was actually mastered diopters, which allow you to focus closer than the minimum focus. They're just magnifying glasses. But I actually looked it up, and the 14mm Master Prime does have this really thick, I don't know what you call it, this thick part of the lens where the clip-on matte box goes onto. I guess that front element just like really protrudes out, or they need to protect it, or some optics engineering things going on there. But cool. You just see how really close you are, or how close the camera is to the talent almost always in this movie, which is really interesting. And so to do some dynamic walking shots that are smooth, they use Steadicam and they use handheld, and they also used basically all the stabilized heads there are. This is like a flight head, I think. So static fixed length jib on a pretty off-road vehicle here, and this whole situation's moving that way. And this allows you to change the height of the camera, keep it stabilized, keep the horizon stabilized, just like a Ronin would do, or a Movi. And because they're shooting a lot at sunset, a lot of magic hour stuff, you got to move really quick. You got to fly. So this vehicle is going to allow you to reset, move, change height, do all that stuff much faster than, say, a Steadicam or something else. And the moves are obviously, more dynamic. You can get really, really high in the air if you needed to. This is something to nerd out about. Now, I love cranes, and I love cranes so much that I've built every single crane in 3D to scale that actually function, and I use that for 3D cine design. And I also love stabilized heads, and this is my favorite stabilized head. It's the Geosystems, I think, is the company. They're kind of a secretive company, but this round circle, when you see the circle, this is a Libra head. In New York, you can get Libra heads from Monster Remotes, and in LA, I think you get them directly from Geosystems, I forget. And this looks to me, it's kind of blacked out. It's not a Technocrane. Now, Technocrane SRO is a brand of telescoping cranes, though people call all cranes like this Technocranes, kind of like Kleenex and tissues. Technocrane's actually a brand, but I guess it's one of the more dominant ones. This one I see quite a bit on set, though. I believe this is a movie bird. And they have an interesting history, movie bird and Technocrane, but I won't get into that. That's maybe not even my place to say that. And this Technocrane, see, I did it, /movie bird, is mounted to an off-road vehicle, so they can just, you can see what's happening. They can move the crane around wherever they need to get it. Otherwise, it would be quite difficult to move this in the snow, /impossible. And here's a shot of said movie bird in action with the Libra. If you can imagine, like, the base of this crane is like way back, going over this cliff, and it can pull back and move through and just do cool moves. And what else? What's interesting here is that the slate is upside down, if you can tell. And what that's called is called tail slating. So at the beginning of a take, if you slate in the beginning of the take, so it's like roll camera, you slate, that's the head of the take. If you're like thinking about editing, or if it was a film strip, the head of the film versus the tail being the end. Slate, the head slate, you slate forward like this with this clapper part up. But in this case, if you consider that Leonardo DiCaprio just came out of the water from back here, so he was walking up, they're not going to head slate because he's in the water, so they want to get him out as soon as possible, not waste time. So they do the whole take, and at the end of the take, they tail slate. So you flip it upside down, bam, you slate it. That's some entry level first day on film set kind of talk. This is the last BTS, and then we're going to get into talking about the imagery of the movie from my point of view. And now I read at least all the headlines that were like, the Revenant shot completely with natural light and Chivo natural light. And, by and large, in an exterior this big and uncontrolled with wide lenses where you can't hide a condor as a backlight and that sort of stuff, there's going to be a lot of, natural light. And we're going to talk about natural light in the next scene. But what he does do, and I learned this from Max Goldman, I've learned this over and over again from different DPs that do high-level exterior shooting, is that you have this big fly swatter. And what's on the front of this? Nothing. It's black. It's a big black 20 by 12 or something like that, or 20 by 40. I don't know how big it is. But what this can essentially do is, if you picture there's like daylight on me now, so look at me in this room. That window is kind of backlighting me. You can see it reflected on the desk here. And then what I'll have to show you at some point, is there's a skylight that I kind of have poorly blacked out that's lighting me. And then I have an area locaster through diffusion lighting me. So what this kind of feels like is like that's kind of the sun backlighting me. And then in this room right now is ambient light, like the sky. And that's what's going on in a lot of this movie. And so what you do with something this big is you take a solid, and say you wanted me to be dark. See how I'm like a little bit bright in the scene? A lot of this movie, they play it dark. So to control the lighting on the talent in the foreground, what they do is they put a big solid over me. So you kind of block the light off of me. He can do that in a very big scale for large portions of the scene. And that's what that's for. So that's kind of like large scale negative lighting, because what you have at exterior is just too much light. So you're taking away light, and it's usually taking away light from the foreground. And maybe I'll try to point out in different places where I think that that's happening. So here is our next slide. And before we get into like the lighting and stuff, what I thought was interesting, and this should talk a little bit about my references in the world, is that when I saw this silhouette, and this is like kind of a following shot here. So the whole camera, and in storyboard world, when you want to draw forward action, it looks like this. It's an arrow that's in perspective. You could even do this. Kind of draw it. It means that the camera is moving forward. And following behind is this. It reminded me so vividly of video games, of third-person video games, and it reminded me of Gears of War. This is a still from Gears of War where you're behind your character, and you're controlling this person, but at the same time, you need this really wide field of view. And I don't know if that's helpful for anybody or anything, but I couldn't help but keep thinking that every time I saw the shots like this. I was like, oh, we're like playing a video game. So there's, I think the thing to take away from it is that they were this wide angle shot. It solves a problem of being able to see a character and then also be able to see the background. And that's kind of how they're using wide lenses in this case. And then video game people have had to solve this similar issues and solve them with wide lenses in a similar way. So I thought that was cool. So here is a very kind of powerful scene in the movie. I'm going to try not to do any spoilers, but you know what? I'm going to just have to do spoilers. So spoiler alert. I'm going to have to put that in the beginning. Sort of. Is this a spoiler? This is Leonardo DiCaprio's son. And he is half Native American, and that causes a lot of conflict in the movie and kind of adds depth to his character. It's not just like the white man versus the Native Americans or the Indians, if you want to call it that. They added some depth to the story in that, Leonardo DiCaprio actually has a half Native American son. So there's a scene here where they're having a dialogue, and what I wanted to point out is that because they're shooting this with a wide lens and the way that it's lensed, you see that this character is much closer to camera and he's much bigger. It's much more exaggerated, and we're seeing his emotion, and we're seeing him up here, and we're kind of looking up at Leonardo DiCaprio. It's kind of like we're looking up at him as if we're the child, and he's like this big authority figure. It's like his dad. So we kind of have we see his reaction, and we're also kind of seeing his point of view at the same time. So it's an interesting thing that's going on. And then what's also interesting about shooting wide lenses like this is that like their spatial relationship to each other is kind of realistic. It's like how close you really would be if you were having this kind of intense of a conversation. I won't go into what they're talking about here, but he kind of backs off. I'll take off the overlay, and then the shot goes to his son, who we can clearly see is kind of upset. It's an intense scene. And I believe this is the behind the scenes shot of them shooting that scene. And again, they're really close, and it looks like they're using a Leica Summilux just Summilux, the T131s, because this is pretty long, pretty wide. And for Birdman, they mixed the wide Leica and the wide Master Primes as well. Chivo did, because I think each one has a different flare characteristic and, different focal lengths. So he mixes Master Primes and Leicas, apparently. Both modern lenses. Lots of flare code, not much flare. And then here's that same kind of shot, but flipped, where we see the son's point of view. Or I'm sorry, we see the son as kind of the dominant figure in the frame here, looking down at Leonardo DiCaprio, who is clearly seen better days. But I thought that was a cool, reversal there going on. So that's just the camera work, and we talked about cameras, and now we're going to talk about some of the lighting. So this first section is what I'm calling fire and sky. And what I want to break down for you here is if it's a way to think about the sky as far as lighting. So this sky, picture it just one big 20 by 20 or 12 by 12 or whatever the biggest diffusion you usually is. Just picture that the sky is a big diffusion, so it's over you. And coming through that diffusion is a blue light. That's basically what the skylight is, especially at magic hour. And now consider this down here, this little strip here that is the sunrise, where the sun's going to be. So not the direct sun, but like the indirect sun from the clouds and the atmosphere, that warm light here. Picture that as being like one KinoFlow bulb that has orange gel on it. That's the way that I start to look at this stuff. It's like a blue light from the top and then a soft orange light from a certain direction. And the orange light's a little bit brighter, though it's smaller. So that's kind of what I want to look at going through here, is that we have a very blue top light or ambient light, and we have an orange light coming from somewhere else. Sometimes it's the sky, sometimes it's man-made light, but it's a very blue versus orange kind of color palette happening. And these are some of my favorite scenes in the movie visually. So here we have the same thing, and I'm going to do some color palette dancing. I actually got my Wacom to work. Sorry that didn't work last time. Trust me, it annoyed me more than it did you, I'm pretty sure. Here are the blue tones. And again, the sky is the blue that it would normally be. But the snow would normally be white, right? If it had white light on it. So we can tell that this blue light from the sky up here coming down is rendering this white snow blue to camera. And then, of course, we have this little fire pit down here, which is really cool. This is such a cool, awesome wide shot. And we have the orange against the blue. And that's kind of what the theme of this next couple slides is going to be. Fun stuff going on here. And I just wanted to call out is that in this color correction, these colors are very saturated. And I'm not going to do a full breakdown of what saturation means. I think a lot of you know what it means or think you do or have a basic understanding of it, but I'm going to break it down a little bit more sciencey / traditional art way in future episodes or courses or something. I'm going to break it down. It's important. But just to say that this orange right here is saturated, and I'll show you what the desaturated version of it would look like inside of it. That's what a desaturated orange would look like. This blue, very saturated. If I desaturated that blue, it would look like this. And if I desaturated this blue, it would look like that. I know that seems obvious, but it'll make more sense why I'm calling that out in the next set of slides. So we have a very, again, fire and sky. Fire is orange, sky is blue, very saturated also. We're going high saturation for this look. Honestly, these saturation levels are akin to Mad Max, which is another film up for Best Cinematography this year. Blue and orange. Kind of similar, actually. I should do a comparison. Moving forward, again, we have the blue in the sky and clearly the very saturated and now bright hot spots of the fire. So very saturated blue, very saturated orange. Very likely that both of those things were isolated in color correction and brought up. And as far as the color correction thing, I mean, there's a natural vignette going to happen from the sun coming up over here, but also there's probably like a window over here kind of vignetting this whole scene. This is so strong when you combine these two colors together. I mean, blue and orange, if you're looking for a color scheme for most of what you're looking for, if you're trying to add color contrast, add some orange and add some blue. It's likely going to look really good. Just works really well. It's very natural here. Again, the torches, dude's carrying his own key light. That's always convenient. Very saturated orange, very saturated blue. So sky and fire and sky. And then just such an amazing close up, shallow depth of field. Like look at the tone that he placed his skin tone at. Look at the tone. Let's find the color of skin tone here. It's like black. It's like almost black. It's so dark. That's the skin tone that we placed, that they placed his skin at. And then we have this contrasting warm, very saturated. So is this, are the blacks saturated? These blacks are actually kind of desaturated, but the fire is very saturated. And we have this amazing contrast, and it's just a cool mood. Fire and sky. That's what we're calling this. And then just another kind of amazing portrait going on in this scene. So that's the look at fire and sky, and now we're going to look at the ice look. And this reminds me of Game of Thrones, like when they were seeing the walkers? I forget what they're called. I actually stopped watching Game of Thrones because it's scary, and I don't like scary movies. And I haven't had time to catch up on it, though I read all the books. So nerd alert, World of Warcraft, Game of Thrones, I'm on top of those things, just not the show anymore. So the reason I called this the ice look is that when people ask for what I would say a steely blue or an icy blue, what they actually mean. So this is important if you're a DP, you're a colorist, you're working with a director, you're working with an agency, someone all of a sudden says like, I want an icy feeling. I want an icy blue. This is what they mean almost always in my experience. So let's grab this color. What is this color? This is a middle blue and it's desaturated. So I'll show you what the saturated version of that color would be. That is the saturated color. And that's kind of the color that they were making the sky in the fire and sky section. But icy, steely blue is desaturated blue, just like this. And I'm going to go through a couple scenes that have this look and this kind of color correct. So in this case, instead of pumping the saturation in the blue, I really got to get my resolve panel going so I can talk about these things a little bit more confidently. Or not, I can illustrate them more confidently to you. Instead of boosting the blue saturation, they've actually grabbed the blue and they've desaturated it. And they are allowing some pretty dark blacks that are still blue. This is actually a pretty monochromatic scene. So the blacks are tinted blue, but the white is pretty neutral. Yeah, the white is neutral, definitely neutral here, but everything else gets this desaturated blue color cast to it. And I could show you how you did that, how you would do such a thing in Resolve when I get my tangent ripple panel or element. I don't know which one I'm going to get. I'm going to get one of them. Here's that same palette back here. Desaturated blue is happening with a neutral white. It's a neutral white. It's neutral. And let's look at what the skin tone is. Interesting colors for the skin tone. Skin tone's blue. There's some red in there for the lips and the nose, is a little bit, but not much. And then of course we have this awesome little fire deal happening right in the center. And this is so cool. This looks like a video game or something. And what I want to call attention to here again is atmospheric perspective. I'm going to say it again. Atmospheric perspective. So like atmosphere perspective. I'm going to say that a lot because it's probably the number one strongest way to make something look cinematic or to give something depth. And not that many people talk about it. But it also relates to when people say smoke and mirrors. The smoke part is the atmospheric perspective. So we have it here where atmospheric perspective basically says we have high contrast. So this is a very dark color, very dark. That's like pure black. I just pulled pure black from this guy's hair. And then I'd say like it's contrasted with like this, are some of his brighter tones. And then in the background, so this is high contrast in the foreground. And then in the background, we're taking tones that are like this and we're contrasting them with tones that are like this. So it's a lower contrast. So low contrast in the back, high contrast in the front. That's atmospheric perspective. Moving on. I think we're doing okay for time here. This is another amazing shot, and that's probably the Master Prime flare, though the Leica Suma Lux and the Master Prime's flare kind of similarly, I believe. I've used both, but I wasn't flaring them. I've used the 12 and the 14 before, but I don't remember flaring them directly. But I kind of know from just breaking down Emmanuel Lubezki's work that's how they flare, because I did like a whole breakdown of Birdman and looking at the flares in that, and it's kind of similar here. Again, this very dark desaturated blue. Let's look at the skin tone. Wow. Is that really the skin tone? Wow. I feel like it's brighter. There it is. That's the skin tone, and this is the shadow side. So that's what's going on with this character. And then the brightest tone back here is the snow. And still a natural white and very contrasty, very dark in there. Kind of one of the only times where they tilt the horizon. So if I was to draw the horizon in this scene, let's do it with a bright color. The horizon would be right through here, which means that the camera is canted. And it depending on like what world you come from. If you come from like comic book drawing and graphic design, a canted horizon is supposed to imply action, because there's kind of gravity. If you pictured a ball here, that ball would roll down that hill, and that implies gravity and action. That's kind of what's happening there, versus a flat horizon. I'm gonna have to reset that. Sorry, guys. A ball here with gravity would just stay put. It wouldn't go anywhere. So that's one of the ways to think about horizon. And it's a reason, and it was actually really hard to do back in the day. So I'm talking like back in the day, it was like the 40s with big heavy cameras. Like to make a camera that was like the size of a car go sideways wasn't going to happen. But I think that's kind of what happened when the cameras got small, like French New Wave. Definitely the 80s, they loved getting the camera sideways. That's why they did it. It was dynamic, and then it kind of got a bad name depending on what generation you're in. I have a really negative video connotation with doing this with the horizon, but there are strong graphic design and cinematic reasons to do it. So yeah. So that is a look at, I think, all of the lighting stuff I'm going to look at. Yeah. So next we're going to look at two camera moves that I thought were really, 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 really cool. So this scene, the lighting's not as exciting, though it's still backlit. It's just not as exciting. It's bright. But look how wide this lens is. This is probably the 12 or the 14 Master Prime. Look how big the gun is. It's so funny. So here's Rob Hardy. And obviously has a gun pointed at him. And then we go from this shot where it kind of comes in at him, and then the gun's here, comes in, and then it turns around, and it's awesome. It's really cool. Alejandro and Chivo really, really nailed this continuous take thing. So let's walk through this move. We push in. This is all one take. We're pushing in on him, and then we get to this like really intense close up, and then the camera starts to turn around. Starts to whip pan. I mean, look how, and this gun is right. It's like inches from the camera's face. I mean, it's intense. And he's basically, what he's done is he's connected to over the shoulders. So a dolly in and a dolly in. If you're doing, you would normally do those separately and then cut in between. He's put them into one move. So he dollies in, gets to a close up, spins around, and then dollies back with a wide lens on. Really cool. And then kind of the last thing that we're going to look at for this breakdown here is this other camera move, and it's amazing. And it doesn't break your attention. You believe it a little bit more because there's no cutting. There's no like, you don't have to suspend your belief temporally because you're just watching it all happen at once. So he's got the long rifle again. He's pointing it, and someone grabs him from behind, and he throws him into the water, and he's trying to drown him, and the camera's starting to come in, and we're watching him. He's like trying to come back up for air, and then he's like, no, you're going back under the water, and the camera follows him all the way down in the bubbles, and it's like, what's happening? It's really kinetic and disorienting, and then we see him here. So those are two really strong uses of wide lenses and two really cool camera moves from this movie. So we looked at a little bit of the gear. Bad joke about the eye from the beginning. It's just a funny behind the scenes still, I thought. And we looked at some of the wide lenses, how it kind of reminded me of similar solution to problems storytelling wise of how do you see the background and also see the person at the same time, solved by the Gears of War developers. So wide lenses from behind worked for that. And we also looked at some fire and sky lighting and color correction. So really saturated orange, really saturated blue. And then we looked at the ice look, which is a desaturated blue look where the blacks are blue, but the white is still neutral. And then we looked at two camera moves. So that's my look at the Revenant. Again, I don't want to do anything that's going to kind of spoil it for you. I really want you to go see it. But at the same time, just re-look at the Revenant, appreciate some of the colors that were going on. So even aside from the fact that the making of this film is kind of phenomenal and was kind of like a torture test for the crew, even if this was an animated movie, we could still talk about the color choices and how they were using lensing. It's pretty universal. Lighting in the computer, lighting in real life, animation versus live action capture, it's kind of all merging together these days. And you'll see that with the movies that are winning cinematography. And I know that the people are talking about having their own category for live action versus visual effects movies, though I don't think that's probably going to happen. So I try to look at anything. I can break down cinematography of game cinematics too in this way. It's just looking at it for what it is, for the 2D images and what they're using color for and the lensing to tell the story, and start to not worry so much about the equipment because that's becoming less and less of what distinguishes films these days is the equipment that was made with it. It's really what you do with it. So I'm starting to move that direction with this kind of breakdown. So tomorrow is March 1st, and March 1st is Cinedesigner Day. And so my 2D symbol library is going to be available at cinematographydb.com at the online shop. Go check that out. And I'm going to premiere right now for you my little branding slash launch film to help explain what Cinedesigner is and how to use it. So check that out right now. Cinedesigner is a database of 2D symbols or representations of film equipment. Cinematographers and filmmakers use these symbols to create overhead lighting and camera diagrams. This process is called cinematography design, or Cinedesign for short. Traditionally, this process was done by hand, but computers have allowed us to do this faster and more accurately. What makes Cinedesigner different? Cinedesigner symbols are created in 3D first and then rendered as 2D overhead graphics. They are created at a 1 foot to 100 pixel scale, and each piece of equipment is in scale with each other. That allows you to be able to create scale lighting and camera diagrams. Why 3D first? We believe that having accurate graphical representations of the equipment make the final diagrams easier to read. We render the lights at several angles: level, tilt up, tilt down, straight up, and straight down, depending on the piece of equipment. How do you use the symbols? We recommend programs like Adobe Photoshop or Illustrator. However, they will work with any program that can import .tiff or .png files with alpha channels. You simply import them into a document and drag them into position. Thank you for taking the time to learn about CineDesigner. We can't wait to see what you make. Cool, so thank you so much for watching that if you stayed. I tried to put it at the end, so if you wanted to just skip it, that's completely cool. I don't want to make you sit through it if you don't want, but if you want to help support me and Cinematography Database and also make some bespoke lighting diagrams, I'm putting that out there for you guys. And I'm starting to use it, and I can't say right now who else is starting to use it, but someone else who I think you probably also follow is starting to use it as well, and I think we're going to do cool stuff with it in the future. Thank you again for watching this show. If you want to head to cinematographydb.com, go to the video section under Cinematography Database Show and find the show notes or the show post for this. And I post links to the documentary, to some extra information and that sort of thing. And then you can sign up for the Cinematography Database newsletter there as well, which would be super cool if you did. Of course, don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel if you like this type of content. Give the video a like, send me a comment. Let me know what you want to see broken down, what you like, you didn't like, that sort of stuff. I'm into it. And again, thank you. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys later. I'll now see you on the next episode. Bye-bye.